Hi, my name is Ryan Peters. I am a second-year Catholic missionary with the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. I serve up at Washington State, and as you might tell by my line of work, this is a topic that's very important to me. So I'd like to dive in today a little bit to this pervasive idea, new idea, that Jesus never existed, that he wasn't, as C.S. Lewis's coined trilemma, either Lord, liar, or lunatic, but that he was indeed a legend. So we're going to add a fourth L to the trilemma and dive into what that means and how we can go about rationalizing this thought. So the essential message of Catholicism is the fact that Jesus Christ lived, died, and was raised on the third day in expiation for the sins of humanity. This has widespread implications for us today. If this is true, we must and are called to live the Christian lifestyle. But if he never existed, this means nothing to anyone, and everything that has been done for the past 2,000 years in the church is for nothing. So, we could dive into all of the reasons that Jesus had to come and live and die and resurrect, but I'd like to dive into this fourth L, which is that Jesus was a legend. So C.S. Lewis coined his trilemma in the 1900s, and I'd like to dive into this first. One, liar. So if Jesus is indeed a liar, all that he said is not true, and he just did it to gain some type of merit or glory on earth. He can't be a liar if we see him as a good moral teacher. Those just don't go hand in hand. He wouldn't be good. And we can kind of debunk this idea by the fact that he lived with 12 men for 3 years. And if you know anything about the Jewish tradition, you would know that Jewish disciples followed their rabbi so closely that they would be covered in the dust from his sandals. Covered in the dust from his sandals. That is how intimately close their relationship was. They would do things like sleep in the same house, go camping, do a myriad of things, walking into town, greeting people, healings, miracles, all of this. So if these 12 men lived with him for 3 years, you would imagine, and it would naturally follow, that someone eventually would catch him in some kind of lie, if he were a liar. So moving on to the next point, that he was a lunatic, you can kind of debunk this as well based on the fact that a lunatic would not have said the things that he said, or even if a lunatic would have said the things he said, the people that he was around, the type of people, fishermen, tax collectors, both educated and uneducated, someone would have found out that he was just a crazy person at some point, and he would have been cast out of the temple, just like any leper of the time would have. So we come to the natural conclusion that Jesus must be the Lord, and we must take everything that he said at face value. I'd like to include here a quote from C.S. Lewis on this coined trilemma. So I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing often people say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would be a lunatic, on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, nor did he intend to. We are faced, then, with a frightening alternative. This man we are talking about either was and is just what he said, or else a lunatic or something worse. Now it seems to me obvious, and I agree with C.S. Lewis on this point, that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. So if we follow C.S. Lewis's logic, we come to the realization that Jesus can be nothing more than God. He has to be. But what of the legend aspect that I spoke of earlier? I think this is very important because if that is true, none of this makes any difference. None of this whole Lord Liar Lunatic argument makes any changes whatsoever. So for that, for the case of the historical Jesus, we turn to Bart D. Ehrman, a prominent scripture scholar and historian. So Ehrman agrees and states in his book, Did Jesus Exist?, that Jesus was a real person, that he was ineluctably Jewish, and that there is historical information about him in the Gospels. He also states that nearly every scholar in his field is in strong agreement upon this as a fact. So Ehrman looks to 2 points to prove this. One, simply looking at St. Paul and all that St. Paul said about Jesus, and the fact of St. Paul and St. Peter being so intimately close for the years that everything was written, by merit of St. Peter's relationship with Jesus and how intimately close that was. If you don't know who St. Peter is, he was one of the 3 that was explicitly chosen by Jesus within the 12 to spend the most time with him. The second point is that at the time, if you were seeking to prove that to the Jewish people that someone was the Messiah, you wouldn't really include the fact that he was crucified and hanged on a tree. And many times in the Old Testament, it's explicitly stated that anyone who is hanged upon a tree is cursed by God. So I'd like to read from to you from the book of Deuteronomy very quickly. And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall bury him the same day. For a hanged man is accursed by God. The Jewish people would have seen that as a sign that Jesus was not the Messiah. And therefore, in light of the inclusion of this fact, we can be pretty positive that he existed and was killed on the cross. So by merit of these 2 things, we can be sure of the historical reality of Jesus. And with C.S. Lewis's well heard of trilemma, if we mold these 2 together, we can come to one final conclusion. And by merit of Jesus being a real person, put into context of one of the greatest minds of our time, who found no way around this trilemma, we must come to accept the fact that Jesus is Lord and all of the ways in which that applies to our lives today. We must come to realize the effect this must have in our lives and our deeper responsibility to live the central message of the gospel, to learn what Jesus taught and to follow him just as his apostles did, like I mentioned, close enough to be covered in the dust of his sin.